They took my badge before they took my breath away. I still remember the sound of it, that small clip snapping open, my hospital ID sliding out of my hand and into the palm of a man who couldn't even look me in the eye. 14 years. 14 years of double shifts, of holding strangers' hands while they died, of missing my own daughter's birthday parties because someone's mother needed me more that night. And it ended with a folder, a signature, and 2 security guards standing outside a conference room like I was dangerous. My name is Meredith Hale. I was a nurse. On the worst day of my life, I was told I was nothing anymore. But what nobody in that room understood, what nobody could have understood, was that 3 hours later, I would walk back into that same hospital, not as an employee, but as the only person willing to save a life everyone else had already given up on. This is the story of how I got suspended for doing what was right, and how the truth came back to save me when I thought I had lost everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before all of this, to understand what it cost me to lose it. I grew up in a small house on the edge of a town most people drive through without stopping. My mother cleaned offices at night. My father wasn't around long enough for me to remember his face without squinting at an old photograph. We didn't have much, but my mother always said one thing to me, over and over, like a prayer she was trying to plant inside my chest: take care of people, Meredith. That's the only wealth that never runs out. I became a nurse because of her. I watched her hands, cracked and tired from bleach and mop water, and I promised myself I'd use my hands for something gentler. Something that healed instead of just cleaned up after other people's messes. By the time I was 38, I had built a life I was proud of. I worked in the intensive care unit at Ashford Memorial Hospital, a mid-sized hospital that served half the county. I wasn't rich. I drove a car with more than 160,000 miles on it. But I had something else. I had respect. The kind you earn slowly, shift after shift, year after year, until even the doctors who used to look past you start asking for your opinion in the middle of an emergency. I had a daughter, Ivy, 12 years old, sharp as a blade and twice as stubborn as me. Her father left when she was 4, and it had just been the 2 of us since. I worked nights so I could pick her up from school in the afternoons. I fell asleep some evenings still wearing my scrubs, because there wasn't time to change before I had to help with homework. It wasn't an easy life. But it was mine, and I had built it with my own 2 hands, and I was proud of every callus it left behind. I tell you all of this not because it matters to the story of what happened at the hospital, but because I want you to understand what was at stake for me. It wasn't just a job. It was the only proof I had that all those years of sacrifice meant something. The trouble started, as it so often does, with someone smiling at me a little too warmly. His name was Dr. Nathaniel Voss. He joined Ashford Memorial about 2 years before everything fell apart. A rising star, they called him. Young, confident, the kind of doctor who wore his white coat like a crown. He had a way of making the hospital administration fall in love with him before he'd even finished settling into his office. Charity galas. Donor dinners. His face on the hospital's website under excellence in patient care. I didn't trust him from the start. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way he talked about patients like case numbers instead of people. But I kept my head down, because that's what you do when you've clawed your way into stability. You don't rock the boat you spent years building. For a while, it seemed harmless enough. He was charming with the other nurses, distant with me. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't there to be liked by every doctor who walked through the door. I was there for the patients. But there was one night that changed everything, though I didn't know it yet. It was a Tuesday in early spring. I remember because the cherry trees outside the hospital entrance had just started blooming, and I'd taken a photo of them on my phone to send to Ivy, who loved anything pink. That same night, an elderly man named Walter Higgins was brought into the ICU after a bad fall. 81 years old, kind eyes, the kind of patient who thanked you even while he was in pain. Dr. Voss was assigned to his case. I noticed something wasn't right almost immediately, a medication order that didn't match his chart, a dosage that made my stomach turn cold the moment I read it. I double-checked it 3 times, because surely a doctor with Voss's reputation wouldn't make a mistake like that. But the numbers didn't lie. I brought it to him quietly, in the hallway, so no one else would hear. I didn't want to embarrass him. I just wanted to protect Walter. Dr. Voss, I said, I think there might be an error in Mr. Higgins's medication order. The dosage looks. He cut me off before I could finish. Are you second-guessing my orders, Nurse Hale? No, I said. I'm just making sure we're both reading the same chart. He looked at me the way you'd look at gum stuck to your shoe. Administer it as written. I didn't. I couldn't. Every instinct I had, every year of training, every ounce of the promise I made to my mother, told me that following that order would hurt a man who had done nothing but trust us with his life. So I flagged it. I called the pharmacy. I contacted the attending on call. And it turned out I was right. The dosage was off by a dangerous margin. Walter Higgins's life was saved because a nurse refused to stay quiet. That was the night the countdown began, even though I didn't hear the clock ticking. Weeks passed. Life moved the way it always does. Ivy's school project on the water cycle, a birthday party for one of my coworkers, small moments strung together like beads on a string. I almost forgot about the tension with Dr. Voss. Almost. But he didn't forget. Men like him never do. I started noticing small things. My schedule shifting without explanation. Assignments changing at the last minute, always putting me in the hardest, most understaffed sections of the floor. Comments from the nursing supervisor, Diane, that felt just a little too pointed. A Dr. Voss mentioned you seemed distracted lately, Meredith. Everything okay at home? Everything was not okay at home, not in the way she meant. But it had nothing to do with my work, and everyone who worked beside me knew it. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself he'd moved on, that professionals don't hold grudges over one correction, however uncomfortable. I wanted so badly to believe that, because the alternative was exhausting to consider, that somewhere in that hospital, someone was quietly building a case against me, brick by brick, waiting for the right moment to bring the whole thing down. I didn't know yet that the moment was already circled on his calendar. I didn't know that the file with my name on it had already been started. I didn't know that in a matter of weeks, the badge that had defined me for 14 years would be taken from my hand in a room with the blinds shut, while the man responsible sat 2 floors above, sipping coffee, waiting for the news. But what I didn't know that day, walking home under those blooming cherry trees, was that betrayal doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes wearing a white coat and a kind smile, and by the time you see it clearly, it's already standing behind you with its hand on the door. The day it happened started like any other. I remember tying my shoes at the kitchen table while Ivy ate cereal across from me, her eyes glued to her phone, headphones half in, half out. "Bye, Mom," she mumbled without looking up. "Love you too," I said, kissing the top of her head before I left. I had no idea it would be the last ordinary morning I'd have in a very long time. I got to the hospital at 6:45, same as always. I clocked in. I checked my patients. Everything felt normal, until Diane found me in the break room around 10, her face carefully arranged into something professional and distant. "Meredith," she said. "Administration needs to speak with you. Now, if you can." My stomach dropped, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a scheduling issue. Maybe a question about a chart. I walked down that hallway telling myself a dozen small lies to keep my hands from shaking. Inside the conference room sat the hospital's HR director, a woman named Patricia Cole, and beside her, unbelievably, Dr. Voss himself, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Please, sit," a Patricia said. I sat her day. "Meredith, we've received a complaint," as she continued, sliding a folder across the table. "A formal allegation of medication tampering and falsifying patient records." The room tilted. I heard myself say, What? That's not. I haven't done anything like that." The complaint states that on 3 separate occasions, you altered dosage records after administering incorrect medication in an attempt to cover discrepancies, a Patricia said, reading from a script that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I looked at Dr. Voss. He didn't blink. "This is insane," I said, my voice cracking despite every effort to hold it steady. "I flagged a dosage error. I saved a patient's life. Ask Walter Higgins's family. Ask the pharmacist. Ask anyone who was on shift that night." "We take allegations of patient safety violations extremely seriously," a Patricia said, her tone unmoved, rehearsed. "Given the severity of the claims, we have no choice but to suspend you, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." I remember the sound my own heartbeat made in my ears, like something drowning. 14 years, and it was being erased in 14 minutes. Who filed this complaint? I asked, though somewhere inside me, I already knew. Patricia glanced, just briefly, toward Dr. Voss. That was answer enough. "I want to see the evidence," I said. "That will be shared during the formal investigation," a Patricia replied. "For now, we need your badge and your hospital keys." I sat there for a moment that felt like it stretched into years. I thought about my mother's cracked hands. I thought about every night I'd missed with Ivy, so I could hold a stranger's hand through their last breath. I thought about Walter Higgins, alive because I refused to look away from a dangerous mistake, and now being punished for exactly that. I unclipped my badge. My fingers were trembling so hard I nearly dropped it. "This isn't right," I said quietly, to no one and everyone at once. "You know this isn't right." No one answered me. 2 security guards walked me to the parking lot, as though I were something that needed to be escorted off the premises rather than a woman who had spent a third of her life keeping people alive inside those walls. I sat in my car for almost 40 minutes before I could bring myself to turn the key. I didn't cry, not yet. I was too stunned for tears. Shock has its own strange silence. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I couldn't tell Ivy the full truth. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that the world sometimes punishes you for doing the right thing? I told her I was on a temporary leave. She believed me, because children believe their mothers, even when their mothers are quietly falling apart. I replayed every interaction with Dr. Voss, searching for the moment I could have done something differently, some way I could have protected myself. But there was nothing. I had done my job. I had done it well. And somehow, that had become my crime. I called the state nursing board to ask about my rights during an investigation. I spoke to a lawyer who specialized in employment cases, a tired but kind man named Julian Ortiz, who listened to my story with his brow furrowed the entire time. "This sounds retaliatory," he told me. "But without evidence, it's your word against a hospital's paperwork. We need proof." Proof. That word haunted my nights. I had none, nothing but memory and conviction, and neither of those hold up in front of a hospital board determined to protect its rising star. I spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if all those years of sacrifice had been for nothing. I wondered if I would ever wear scrubs again, if the hands that had held so many dying patients steady would now be remembered only for a lie someone else had written about them. There were moments I nearly broke completely. I remember sitting on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m, phone in my lap, staring at Walter Higgins's daughter's number, wondering if I even had the right to ask a family for help after everything that had happened. I felt shattered in a way I didn't have words for, not angry yet, just hollow, like something essential had been scooped out of me and left an echo in its place. But grief, I've learned, doesn't stay in one shape forever. Somewhere between the third sleepless night and the fifth, something inside me shifted. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was something quieter and steadier, a refusal. A refusal to let a man who had never once sat with a dying patient, who had never once held a grieving family's hands, decide the story of my life's work. I thought about my mother again, and the promise I made her. Taking care of people had never run out on me. I wasn't going to let it be stolen from me either. So I stopped waiting to be saved, and I started building my own way back. I began quietly, carefully. I reached out to Walter Higgins's daughter, a warm woman named Carol, who remembered me the second I said my name. "You're the reason my father is still alive," she said, before I'd even finished explaining why I was calling. When I told her what had happened to me, her voice hardened with an anger I hadn't expected. "That's not right," she said. "Tell me what you need." She agreed to write a statement. She agreed to testify, if it came to that. I also reached out to a pharmacist named Renata, who had been on shift the night of the medication error. She remembered everything, the call I made, the correction, the relief in both our voices when the mistake was caught in time. She agreed to give a statement too, though she admitted she was afraid of retaliation from the hospital. "You don't have to be brave for me," I told her. "Just tell the truth." Piece by piece, I started building the proof my lawyer said I needed. I requested copies of the original medication order through a formal records request, something Julian said the hospital was legally required to provide, no matter how much they might want to bury it. It took almost 3 weeks, but eventually, the documents arrived. And there it was, right there in black and white, the original order, in Dr. Voss's own handwriting, with the dangerous dosage clearly written before it had been corrected. There was no tampering. There was no cover-up. There was only a mistake that I had caught, and a man who had decided to erase that fact by rewriting the story with me as the villain. I sat at my kitchen table holding that paper like it was something sacred. For the first time since that conference room, I let myself cry, not from grief this time, but from something closer to release. The truth had been there all along. I just had to be patient enough, and strong enough, to bring it into the light. But I knew a piece of paper alone wouldn't be enough. Hospitals protect their own, especially their rising stars. I needed something undeniable. I needed a moment where the truth couldn't be dismissed, buried, or explained away in another closed-door meeting. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming faster than I expected, and it would arrive in the most unexpected way possible. 3 weeks into my suspension, on a Thursday evening, my phone rang. It was Carol, Walter Higgins's daughter, her voice tight with panic. "Meredith, it's my dad. He's back in the hospital. Something's wrong, and they keep telling us it's fine, but it isn't. It isn't fine. Please, can you come? I want to be honest with you." In that moment, I hesitated, because I was afraid. I was suspended. I had no badge, no authority, no right to walk back into that hospital. Going there could destroy any chance I had of ever getting my job back. But then I thought about my mother's voice. Take care of people, Meredith. That's the only wealth that never runs out. I grabbed my coat and drove straight to Ashford Memorial. I found Carol in the hallway outside her father's room, pale and shaking. They said his oxygen levels are dropping, but the nurse on shift keeps saying it's within normal range. Something feels wrong. I know my father. Something is wrong. I looked through the small window into Walter's room. He was pale, his lips faintly blue, his breathing shallow and uneven, the unmistakable signs of a man in respiratory distress. And no one was reacting with the urgency that his condition demanded. Every part of me that had built a career on trusting my instincts screamed at once. I walked in. I know what that decision could have cost me. I had no legal right to touch that patient's chart, no authority to give orders. But I could see with my own eyes that a man's life was slipping away in real time, and I was not going to let hesitation or fear of consequences cost him what silence had almost cost him once before. Call a rapid response. Now, I said to the nurse inside, my voice steady despite the storm inside my chest. His oxygen saturation is dropping, his color is off, and his breathing pattern has changed. This is not stable. The nurse, young and clearly overwhelmed, hesitated. The monitor says. The monitor is malfunctioning, or he's compensating and about to crash. Call it. Now. Something in my voice, maybe the certainty of 14 years, maybe the desperation of a woman with nothing left to lose, made her listen. She called the response team. Within minutes, doctors filled the room. It turned out the monitor probe had slipped, giving a falsely reassuring reading, while Walter Higgins was, in fact, in the early stages of respiratory failure. The team stabilized him just in time. Just barely in time. Carol collapsed into my arms in the hallway, sobbing with relief. You saved him. Again. You saved him again. I didn't feel triumphant in that moment. I felt only grateful that instinct and love for this work had not abandoned me, even after everything that had been taken from me. But someone had seen me in that room. Someone had recognized the suspended nurse standing over a patient's bed, giving orders like she still belonged there. That someone was Dr. Voss. He found me in the hallway, his face flushed with something between fury and panic. You have no right to be here, he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. You're suspended. You could be arrested for this. A man almost died because a monitor malfunctioned and no one was paying close enough attention, I said, my voice quiet but unshaking. I'm not sorry I was here. This will end your career, he said. For good, this time. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since that conference room, I wasn't afraid. You already tried to end at once, I said. With a lie. I have the original order, Dr. Voss. In your handwriting. The one you tried to erase by rewriting me as the person who falsified records. I have Renater's statement. I have Carol's statement. I have the pharmacy log. And now I have tonight, a room full of witnesses who watched me catch another mistake that could have cost this family everything. His face went pale in a way that told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't expected the truth to survive this long. He hadn't expected me to survive this long. You wouldn't, he said, though his voice had lost its certainty. I would, I said. Because for 14 years, I've taken care of people who couldn't protect themselves. I'm not going to stop now. Not even when the person who needs the truth exposed is me. The following week, I requested a formal hearing before the hospital board, with Julian at my side and every piece of evidence laid out with careful precision. Carol testified. Renata testified, her hands shaking but her voice clear. The medication records were presented, undeniable, unaltered, showing exactly what had happened that first night, and showing, in black and white, that the falsification complaint against me had no basis in truth whatsoever. And then came the hardest, most important piece of evidence, the security footage and incident report from the night I walked back in to help Walter Higgins. The monitor malfunction was documented. My intervention was documented. The nurse I had guided that night gave her own statement, describing exactly how I had caught what everyone else had missed. Dr. Voss sat through the hearing with his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some point on the table, unable to meet the gazes of the board members who had once admired him so completely. When the truth was laid bare, the original handwritten order, the falsified complaint built on nothing but retaliation, the pattern of intimidation toward nurses who dared to question him, the room went silent in a way that felt like the whole building was finally exhaling something it had been holding for a very long time. The hospital board did not just clear my name. They opened a full investigation into Dr. Voss's conduct, uncovering, in the weeks that followed, 2 additional incidents where nurses had quietly left the hospital rather than continue working under threats similar to the ones I had faced. Dr. Nathaniel Voss was suspended, then terminated, his medical license placed under review by the state board. I was reinstated with full back pay, a public apology from hospital administration, and something I hadn't expected, an offer to help redesign the hospital's reporting system, so nurses like the one I had guided that night would never again feel afraid to speak up when something didn't look right. I want to tell you that the moment I got my badge back, I felt triumphant, victorious, whole again. The truth is softer than that, and more honest. What I felt, standing in that hallway with my badge clipped back onto my scrubs, was simply peace. Not the loud, celebratory kind. The quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing you stayed true to yourself even when everything around you tried to convince you that the truth didn't matter. Walter Higgins recovered fully. He sent me a card a few weeks later, in handwriting shakier than it used to be, that said simply, "Thank you for seeing me, twice, when it mattered most." I keep that card in my locker to this day. Ivy asked me, months later, why I had gone back to the hospital that night, even though it could have cost me everything. Because some things matter more than being safe, I told her. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel brave in the moment. Sometimes it just feels necessary. I think about Dr. Voss sometimes, not with hatred, though I once thought I would. I think about him mostly with a kind of sadness, the way you might feel about someone who mistook power for worth, and lost everything trying to protect an image instead of a person. He didn't destroy me, though he tried. In the end, the only thing he destroyed was his own name, built on years of people staying quiet out of fear. I learned something in those dark weeks that I carry with me still. The truth doesn't need to shout to survive. Sometimes it waits quietly, gathering its strength in pharmacy logs and handwritten statements and the memory of a daughter who refuses to believe her father's nurse could ever be the villain of the story. And when the truth finally speaks, it speaks loud enough to be heard, even by those who tried hardest to silence it. I am still a nurse. I still work nights. I still fall asleep some evenings in my scrubs, too tired to change before bed. But I walk into that hospital every day with something I almost lost forever, the certainty that doing right by people, even when it costs you everything, is never, ever a mistake. My mother was right, all those years ago, standing in doorways with cracked hands and tired eyes. Taking care of people really is the only wealth that never runs out. And it was that wealth, in the end, that saved me, long after everything else had been taken away.